Hello everybody, and welcome to Something Who, episode 13. After a couple of shorter podcasts, it's back to our classic format as we review the latest episode of Doctor Who. Can you hear me? Twinned with a classic story, The Crusade. Thanks to those of you who've been keeping us in the podcast charts. It's also great to see our worldwide audience picking up too. So, hello wherever you are, and if you like what we do, please spread the news. And I'm joined once more by Giles. Hello, Giles.
Hello. Good evening.
Yeah, and also Simon.
Hello, Richard. Hello, Giles. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Simon.
First up, it's Can You Hear Me by Charlene James and Chris
Chibnall.
Yeah.
Shiver me shivers.
Chris Chibnall. So the TARDIS crew lands in Sheffield, but everyone's a bit subdued and having nightmares. Who wants to start us off with their thoughts on this one?
Last week's episode was a bit of a clunker for me personally, so, drum roll, this must mean that this week's episode was good.
Hey!
And I think it was. What did you think, guys?
Yeah, I was taken with it. I think, it was inventive. It threw a lot of concepts at the screens, and I'm not entirely sure the plot made complete logical sense. But on the other hand, I thoroughly like my Doctor Who with a good dose of metaphor and analogy and things like that. And I thought it was good. So I'll take it as a win as well.
Yeah, it started off with a nice creepy beginning. Mm-hmm. And a proper historical setting this time, and a very nice representation of Aleppo. It didn't grate that they cut away straight to Sheffield, because after weeks of moaning they gave all of the companions a bit of a backstory, so that worked. We got to see more about Yaz and her background, and Graham and Bradley Walsh. They got a fair crack of the whip. He got a fair crack of the whip. And I just thought it was a cracking yarn. It held me right from the start all the way to the end of it. They did things on a really epic scale involving these godlike figures. The Zelin character was genuinely creepy. I think a few kids after watching that will have scuttled away and maybe had nightmares. And I thought it was excellent, and the special effects were top notch as well. They were really spectacular. I thought this was a really strong story. Even Ryan bucked his ideas. He seemed to do much better, but he didn't seem to have as much backstory as everyone else. No idea why that was. He held... I don't know whether he's actually played any games before, but he seemed to be holding his handset and his controller in a very funny way, down by his toes. I think he's been watching too many home delivery takeaway adverts. They always seem to play games down there like that. If you're an expert like my kids, you seem to hold it down by your knees. But no, apart from that, Ryan did much better this episode.
Yes, yeah. Richard, what did you think?
Yeah, so I thought there was a lot of good stuff that I liked in it. I thought it was doing a lot of things right. There were one or two things that I wasn't so sure about, and we'll probably get to those as we talk through. But yeah, on the whole, I thought good, solid episode. It kept my interest all the way through, and I think, as Simon was saying, it served the characters quite well, and we actually got to know something particularly about Yaz for the first time in a long time.
Zelin was a terrific villain. His fellow godlike being looked a bit Space 1999 with that white hair and reminded me of Christopher Lee. And also that space station or whatever it was, the way I don't know what it was. It's just all the vibrant colours that reminded me of a sort of alien setting in Space 1999 as well. So that was a nice flashback effect. And the thing with Zelin and his fingers was genuinely creepy. And I thought that was a clever bit of storytelling as well. The way the fingers were used and deployed, and the function they performed in that story as well. So I think there was some good. Having been highly critical last week, I think there was some good writing this week. That was a good yarn, and I think we're learning more and more about Yaz as well. I thought that was a great backstory, and yes, there was a mental health theme, but it wasn't too much in your face like some of the previous ones where people have accused them of over moralising and getting on their high horse about things. This seemed like a natural part of the narrative to me. So it sat far more comfortably with me, and I thought the acting this week was much better, and it was a good strong story. So I thoroughly enjoyed it this week.
Yeah, I think you're right about the message. That I mean, it's not necessarily subtle, but it's certainly not overplayed. It's not really heavy-handed like it's been, particularly in Orphan 55. So yeah, I found that sat quite well with me.
Yeah, well, we've even got a callback there that helps, sort of gave some partial justification or heft to Orphan 55 in retrospect, with regard to Ryan having his, that being the subject of Ryan's nightmares. From that point of view, it was good. All three of the companions got a bit of heft for a change, and it didn't. It would feel unfair to criticise it for the fact that there haven't been, if we're in the business of talking about this one episode, it's possibly unfair to say it jars with the rest of it jars with some of the others in regards to suddenly we have character development where we haven't had character development for the characters elsewhere. But it feels like it's a childish thing to criticise this one for doing its job better than some of the other stories have. I think. So yeah, and the guest cast I think were good. Yes, Ian Gilder, is it? I don't know. I gather he's known to Game of Thrones people, but doesn't mean anything to me. It's I never got into that and was widely mocked for asking a couple of years ago. Oh, so is Sean Bean still in it? And therefore found out that apparently, that was his one thing where he got killed off. Yeah,
should have been though. He was the best thing in it.
Yeah, bastard.
Yeah, his hamstrings let him down in the end.
Oh dear. So yeah, no, I thought it was good. I thought the actress playing Tahira.
Right.
I thought it's interesting. I mean, we'll possibly come on to that when we come to our comparison with the Crusade. A story with which this has very little in common, apart from after having somewhat lucked in with our previous selections. I think we knew this was going to be a random thing based on a setting, but it's still interesting. You get points, and one thing, the handling of how do you deal with dialogue and settings that are avowedly in the past, and here we got the direct opposite, the antithesis of the Whitaker approach, which is to cast things in very modern language and have people talking about concepts that we imagine are probably foolishly imagine are modernist concepts that were not so well formulated in the past. But I think equally, you can't really say that one is really more valid than the other. It's just it's a trope we have that we imagine all people in history times spoke in cod Shakespearean, really. Yeah. So I think it was an interesting approach, and probably one that works better with Doctor Who as it is now, to treat those characters in a more modern setting, really.
Yeah. I mean, I'll perhaps have a couple of fairly spurious links between the two that we can talk about later on. So I thought, I mean, immediately when you've got her running through the back streets of Aleppo, I mean, and of course a cold open. So you were just saying the other week how it would be nice to have one, and then we have one, and it works so well as a hook into the story. So it makes you wonder why they haven't done more of them.
Absolutely, when they seem to have been writing them. It doesn't seem to have affected the scripts. The scripts usually have that moment, that moment of 2 or 3 minutes into the script where there is a obvious place for it to go, and I just think it helps the pacing so much. So I was delighted to see.
Yeah, indeed. But I guess the running through the back streets, I mean, it's a rather nicer set or model than you've got in the Crusade, but it's kind of reminiscent of it. In their more limited way, they've got Barbara darting among the shadows, and so you've got something similar.
True enough, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, a nice setting. I mean, the only thing about that whole Syrian part is, I guess, one is why. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any reason why we end up with Syria in 1380 other than why not. And there's a very clunky expositionary dialogue bit with Jodie Whittaker where she starts going on about Syria and hospitals and Islamic doctors and whatever and enlightenment and so on, which
yes.
Is nice, and I don't disagree with any of it. But again, it feels a bit kind of shoehorned in to the script, and they can't think of any other way to get that information across to us.
Yes, yeah. Not that I've got any particular knowledge of sort of Islamic medicine practices, but certainly I was just doing something for a book I was working on the other day,
right?
With regard to Islamic knowledge of physics and stuff like that, and and I think it's a widely overlooked thing still. The sort of Islamic Golden Age stuff, and quite where scholarship got them.
Yeah, I remember going on holiday to the south of Spain, well, decades ago, but seeing all that fantastic Islamic architecture. It dates from about the same period as this. Notably, I suppose, the Alhambra, but a couple of beautiful mosques as well. And you realise that it's a fantastically intricate and clever civilization that's sadly overlooked really in our culture and history. Simon, we've kept you quiet for a little bit. Do you want to chip in again?
Yeah, I touched on how good Graham and Bradley Walsh were, and then that built up to what could have been a nice sort of crescendo where he talks openly about his fears of his cancer coming back, and then I thought that was a little bit clunky, the doctor's reaction to him. You can see in the past where the doctor is very single-minded about focusing on what he or she wants to do on a planet and go off on a jaunt on their own, irrespective of the danger to the companion. So you can see then that the doctor's a little bit indifferent. But surely the doctor there could have come up with some words of sympathy, or tapped him on the shoulder, or we can work through this together. It just seemed very clumsy and wrong. Having dealt with mental health issues so sensitively through that story, that just at the end he gets cold-shouldered.
I mean, the only corollary I've got to that is to say that yes, it's clunky, but on the other hand, the way that I thought you could see it is Graham is sort of saying to her, look, I've got this problem where I'm terrified of cancer coming back. And she's sort of saying to him, well, look, Graham, I've got this problem where I'm a bit socially awkward and I never really know what to say. And, in a sense, they're opening up to each other about the problems that they've got. And it doesn't quite come across in that way. It does feel like she's giving the cold shoulder, but you could kind of see it as her saying, you've opened up to me, I'll open up to you. And so if you find that you're getting something strange from me, it's an affliction that I've got and I'm trying to work through. So I don't know. I thought you could see it in that way.
Well, I think Jodie Whittaker's doctor's probably got another dark secret, and then any second she's going to unzip herself, and Sue Pollard's going to leap out. For 8. We're 1.5 series into Jodie Whittaker, and each week when she's gurning and pulling faces and being scared, it's reminded me of someone, and it finally came to me. So it reminds me of Sue Pollard in Heidi High, Peggy, the Peggy character.
Thanks for that, Simon. Once seen cannot be unseen, isn't that what the young people say? Getting back to that point, yes, it's an interesting point, because I hooted at that at the time, but yes, now you because I thought that's that's really nice and quite true to the Doctor's character, as it were, not quite knowing how to engage with human beings on that level. But on the other hand, now that you made the point, Simon, yes, it is somewhat off kilter with the message of the episode. Interesting. But yes, so maybe I need to take Richard's point of view and think, okay, that's a good way of resolving, sort of squaring that particular circle.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that they get back to Sheffield and immediately you've got the three companions. They fall in with their friends and family, and they all of them to some extent have a fairly easy relationship. I mean, clearly in Yaz's and Ryan's case, they've got a few creases to smooth out with those relationships. But nonetheless, there's a relatively easy touch they've got. Graham's straight back in there with his poker buddies or whatever they are. And then you've got the Doctor being the embodiment of awkward, stuck in the TARDIS, not quite sure what to do with herself. Bit bored, bit fed up, and even when she returns to Aleppo, she forgets that they're not with her, and I guess they're signposting at the start what she then says at the end. So it's there's a coherence, I suppose, throughout the story, albeit that it does maybe stick out like a sore thumb when she says the thing. Ryan's mate has a better accent than him.
I was just going to say, can I give a shout out? I was just about to, it was on the tip of my tongue to say, can I give a shout out to Tebow, the actor who played him, because I was just thinking, I like this guy. It was instantly...
he didn't do Ryan any favours, did he?
No, exactly. Although, then again, I'm glad that we didn't... clearly, they kind of felt, okay, they'd addressed... At least there was some self-knowledge that they'd spent enough of a... they'd spent the previous season addressing Ryan's issues, as it were. So it was probably not a good idea to them, having sort of sorted out some of his demons, they needed a different way into the story for him, his point of view. So giving him a friend who had some issues in that regard was a good way. But great actor, nice little part, I think.
And interesting also, Yaz and her sister, once the parents are out of the way, they've got a much more interesting relationship. In the story last year, the spider one, they're sort of sniping off each other the whole time, but you get the feeling that Yaz's sister Sonia is trying to get the attention of the parents, and it's all about competing for attention with the mother and the father, whereas get them out of the way, and there's still a little bit of interplay between them, but they're a lot more steady with each other, and you'd sense there's some affection. I mean, and there's that lovely line though. I like, Sonia's not cut out for customer services. People are really annoying, and they hate being told that. It's what all of us want to do in a customer services job, I'm sure.
So just getting back onto the sci-fi elements of things. So what do we think of the villains as such? I mean, beyond the performance side of things. I mean, I quite like I think the basic concept. It's funny, the word toy maker crossed my lips about 30 about 1 second before it crossed Zellen's lips because I was just saying, hang on, is it the toy maker? And moments later he name-checked the toy maker as being another being other than himself. So I thought, it's not, but he's clearly playing in the same ballpark. Yes, I quite like this idea. It was quite nice to name-check some of that sort of pantheon of Doctor Who's godlike beings.
Yeah. Yes, and he's got an interesting superpower as well, which is, as well as being, virtually omnipotent until he isn't, he also manages to trick the Doctor into action, which is rather nice. That she's fooled into looking at something at face value rather than seeing that there's something a little bit more complex going on.
Yes. I didn't really get the resolution of the story. I mean, it didn't bother me. The resolution of the sort of the A plot, as it were, how they trapped them. I was willing to just take it as read. Okay, there's a MacGuffin. And done. Okay.
Yeah, so I've called it a Deus in Machina ending because rather than the god coming out of the machine, they pop him back into it. But apart from that, I agree. It does all seem to happen very quickly. But I suppose what we could say about it, it's not really about that.
No,
exactly. The episode is more about the companions and their foibles, I suppose, rather than those beings.
Yes, I agree on that. The beings were that whole thing is just a mechanism to explore the other stuff. So I wonder. Yes, give a shout out for the animated sequence. I thought was lovely as well.
Yes,
that's a good call. Yeah, that was very well done.
Yes, I wonder. I imagine it must have been scripted. It kind of been the director's. I'd be very surprised if the director would decide to do that of her own bat, because they had to. They clearly had to show all of this in some way or other. But it was very nice indeed, and not something the missus said. Yeah, this isn't like you see in Doctor Who when we were watching it. Yeah, this isn't something you normally see in Doctor Who, and sure enough, and yeah, all the better for it. So,
well, it's brilliant that it wasn't another one of those nasty exposition type, exchanges.
Yes,
but well, I mean, it obviously was exposition, but it was exposition in a nice visual way, rather than this kind of, let's pretend to have a conversation while regurgitating 2/3 of the plot.
Indeed.
Yeah, I like that.
That was a neat.
Go on, Simon.
Sorry, Richard. There was a neat trick the Doctor used as well to get her hands on the sonic screwdriver, sort of flicking it out of her hip pocket. Sonic screwdriver to the rescue again.
Is that footballing skills or something? The flick or something. I don't know.
I thought so. Yeah.
Yes.
So, what do you think about the creature, Simon? The I suppose it's Tahira's nightmare, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
That looked like it was a werewolf, wasn't it? It looked like a werewolf to me. We seem to have a lot of beasties in this series with mouthful of teeth, don't we? And I thought, not another one, but this one, for the setting, I thought that was really convincing. I thought that was a good beastie,
a were-ape or something like that, almost. It's like it seems slightly ape-like to me, and but yes, no, it was nicely carried off, and they didn't happily they didn't really they didn't push it too far with what they were trying to get it to do. I think the claws were nice and creepy at the start. I thought, are the Slitheen back?
Oh yes,
that would have been
it was a bit like that, wasn't it? Yeah,
been a turn up for the book.
It's funny, that's seeing the claws and thinking of the Slitheen. That's what made me think of Jodie Whittaker unzipping herself. But yeah, that beastie probably wouldn't have held up for a whole story. So I think it was pitched just right and just used enough to whet your appetite. Yes. And no, I thought again that was very well realised. So good beastie, and good. You two are the science experts, but I thought that was nicely handled as well. So a good time hopping and universe hopping story, I think.
Well, I wouldn't. Yes, I think science-wise, I wouldn't say there's an enormous amount of science in there, really. And you.
How do you feel about two planets almost touching but not quite?
Well, I guess if you stick something in the middle of it that is immensely powerful, then you can stop anything from doing anything in Doctor Who land. I think by that point it would be yes, but I don't know. And that's the thing. Again, it's one of those things where I always hang my take my Dr. Science brain off the hook and think and I still want to see the Tides of Time. I still want to see the. I don't know. Were you guys into the comics at the right period? But the that whole
I remember that particular one.
Yeah. With the solar system bolted together. That some advanced civilization have basically bolted their entire solar system together, and that's a fantastic image. And I cannot believe that post 2005 Doctor Who hasn't. You think it's exactly the kind of thing that RTD would have grabbed and said, "Right, I'm having that." Yeah, so I'm rather surprised, but yeah, I like things like that, and I'm happy to take my sciencey brain off the hook for stuff like that. So perhaps I shouldn't admit that I don't mind that the moon is an egg. Shh. Nobody heard.
I mean, to be honest, I didn't mind that the moon was an egg. The thing I didn't like was
eggs.
It was when it laid another egg afterwards that was a bit of a problem. But anyway.
Ipsney und is a Megsney.
So the nightmares of the companions. So when we've talked about it a bit already, but Yaz is alone. Ryan waited too long to come back, and Graham's got his cancer back again.
Yes, yeah, very nice. Lovely to see Sharon D. Clark pop up again, just for a little moment there. Interesting. Yeah, well, they're all in character. I think. Well, what can you say? I think Graham's completely makes sense because he's a better rounded character. Ryan's makes sense in terms of what he's. It made sense to sort of bolt something onto what he's experienced this season, as I said, rather than sort of go into the archaeology of things that have now been resolved, supposedly to do with his relationships. And Yaz's one, it was nice. I thought it was very nicely handled. It was somewhat sort of made up from whole cloth for the occasion, because we sadly haven't had enough. I don't think that had enough past info on her to say, oh, of course that would be her thing.
Yeah.
Although that psychological insight wasn't necessarily anything you'd have guessed from Yaz. Although I suppose Noisy Asian Family, maybe there was a certain connection there. But it was nice that we got a little nod to, okay, and this is why you became a policewoman.
Yes, indeed.
So from that point of view, it was a nice character beat.
Yes, I haven't been able to think of anything that was seeded in a previous plot that would point in this direction. I mean, it's always possible that there was something and it's passed us by, but this feels to me more like the kind of bad wolf thing where people kind of felt like Russell T Davies shoehorned it in after the fact when he'd had the idea, rather than it having been necessarily seeded all the way through.
Yes. And of course, we got a brief glimpse of the whole timeless child scenario.
Yeah,
whatever's going on there, but that's obviously not meant to make any sense to us just yet.
No. Ryan, it would appear, is getting ready to leave. I mean, that seems to be the import of the last couple of minutes of the story. Which I know would pain all of us if it happened.
Well, I thought his worst nightmare would be having to recite Shakespeare with a Sheffield accent, or having to learn a whole page of dialogue and emote it.
But how nice to actually just get that, to get that quiet moment at the, at the end of actually having, and we had the two conversations obviously went on. Like we had the Jodie and Graham one as a gag, but then just how nice to actually have one of those moments and feel like, okay, people are having an actual conversation that might actually have some meaningful impact in terms of character development and so on.
Yeah, and it feels like, I mean, there's almost 10 minutes to go at the point of resolution.
Yes.
I mean, and it's not the first time, and there've been other stories in New Who where everything's done and dusted, and there's 10 minutes to go. So, but yeah, the time's used quite nicely to round out the stories of the companions. Yeah. And we don't get anything from the Doctor, where she says something like, "Look, if you're feeling really down, it's right important to do something about it, like talk to someone." But obviously not me, because I don't do that kind of thing.
No, fortunately not. Which I think was where this nicely trod the line. Personally,
I'm finding Jodie Whittaker's TARDIS interior a bit dull after Dr. Roof's. Dr. Roof's was perfect. I keep wanting it to come back. I'm sure it will.
Yeah.
Yes. It does feel a bit awkward from the point of view of seating arrangements and so on.
Yes.
Where exactly? So Ryan and Yaz had to go and sit on the stairs in order to have a conversation. It's just, I know.
Yeah.
I know that budgets weren't necessarily stretched to extra TARDIS rooms and so on, but I think having a design that has a bit of a nod to the fact that people actually have to live in this, space-time ship is a good idea. Whereas
Is it a tease as well? We keep seeing random historical figures getting plucked and taken away in the TARDIS, and they fit in seamlessly, and then they're deposited back to where they belong. I mean, are one of these going to crop up later on as a permanent companion? It seems to be a recurring theme.
That's very true.
Yeah. Tahira wasn't mind wiped, was she?
No.
Mind you, maybe she didn't see anything. Anything else you wanted to say about this one before we move along to something else?
I think the only thing I was just going to say, I guess God knows, I've been staying away from the forums, so God knows whether some people threw their toys out the pram about the action line thing at the end. I think it's fine. I have no, I positively applaud it in the circumstances, and I was just thinking, I think that's the first time they've had that on Doctor Who since Vincent and the Doctor. I think would have been possibly the only previous example of that. I'm pretty sure they ran it then.
Yeah.
And much as I enjoyed this was no Vincent and the Doctor.
Yeah. Yeah, and let's face it, you'd much sooner have the action line thing than Graham Norton, popping up. So yeah, it was. I think it was well earned.
Yes.
Any other final thoughts, Simon, before we move on? No,
it's just great to have an enjoyable episode again. After, I mean, you two enjoyed it slightly more, the previous story, but I thought this one was excellent. My big test is whether I'm in a rush to watch it again, and I am with this one. I could just watch Zellin. I thought he was fantastic, and he had that wonderful Sting background music as well when he appeared in a puff of smoke.
Yeah,
I thought he was tremendous. Really well realised.
Yes, I did like the sheer weirdness of the finger thing. I thought that was just.
I did think of Vic and Bob and Shooting Stars as well.
Oh God!
I really want to see those fingers.
Yes, and I mean the female Eternal as well. I've forgotten the name of her. I mean, she was pretty good too.
Yes.
I mean, he had something about him. I would agree with that. But I thought they made quite an interesting couple. The fact there was almost nothing about them that was similar.
Yes, agreed.
Okay, Simon, do you want to do your strand next?
Yeah, I'll just explain. Because I enjoyed the Crusade so much, Giles, I thought I'd do a bit of research on all the historicals and what truly makes historical Doctor Who classic story. And I started to find the lines a bit blurred. So what I was going to do is just pick some at random, and then you and Richard have to decide whether it's a historical or not.
Oh, okay, right.
So
off we go.
Indeed.
How about the gunfighters?
Oh.
Well, I mean, that seems pretty straightforwardly historical. There's no kind of weird alien tech going on. They've sort of landed in the middle of a historical event.
So far as we can, yes, yeah. No, it's the thing. Yeah, it's interesting because the moment you actually throw me the question, I was going to say, well, this will be easy because basically, if it doesn't have anything, but now I'm thinking, okay, well, the gunfighters is so much set in Western fiction rather than...
Well, there is, yes, I suppose there is
rather than anything that approximates the real Old West. But yes, it's a historical in terms of we're not going to have any no mucking around with the space-time continuum.
Yeah, I mean, it's as realistic as the Crusade is. It seems to be set in a Shakespeare play.
Yes, I suppose it is, except in a different direction.
Yeah.
I love it. But just for the avoidance of doubt, I love the gunfighters.
Yes. Yeah. So
despite all that awful singing.
Because of all that awful singing.
You like all that? Perhaps that was the sort of Christmas special almost of its day.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, that wasn't shown then.
I always try and love the singing, and I always make a brave attempt, and then somewhere around about the middle of episode 3 it breaks me.
Okay, moving on. How about the Time Warrior? That lovely medieval setting.
Yeah.
And I think it's Iron. Is it Irongron and his merry men?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, so this one, That's an interesting question. So there's two questions about that one. I mean, first off, you've got a healthy amount of present day at the start before they go back, and then of course when they go back, there's a Sontaran in it. I mean, personally, for me, I don't disqualify it simply because it's got a bit of alien in the historical setting. I think, on the whole, the bit in the historical setting is played sort of relatively straight. Yeah, it's not a historical in the sense that the Hartnells and the One Troughton was, but they make a fair stab at the historical setting. What do you think, Charles?
I'm just trying to think this through, because I'm just thinking about what how are we defining historical, and I think maybe there's something to be said for the idea that rather than just our sort of classically derived definition that it's like if it hasn't got aliens in it, it's a pure historical. I'm thinking, okay, is it more to do with whether there's a pivotal moments of history and things like that in it, and it does rather use the history as a backdrop rather than although it handles it nicely, the history isn't essential to the story, I don't think. So
It's only sense story insofar as they're useless to the Sontaran, so he has to reach forward into the future in order to sort it out.
Right, yes.
But you're right. I mean, aside from that, it could have been any time. It just happens to be the Middle Ages.
But that does add a whole other level of science fiction to it. Of course, the time snatching and so on. So, no, I think it's got too much. Yeah. Too much sci-fi for me to count it as historical, personally.
Okay, what about the Black Orchid?
I've always thought of Black Orchid as being a straightforward historical. There, there's the funny bit where they sort of show them the TARDIS as if that's going to solve everything, but that aside, it's a country house historical, isn't it? Go on.
Yes, that is the weirdest. Yeah, that you just put your finger on something there, which that has to be the weirdest and most gratuitous bit of let's show everyone the TARDIS. There's absolutely no reason for that whatsoever in that story, is there? And it's just like, we're not being faced with an extraterrestrial threat. We've not. Yeah. Oh, by the way, yes. Did I mention that we're space-time flappers? Flappers, I said. Yeah, no, that is really odd. And again, thinking of the definition I'm possibly groping towards, I think it's a period piece, but it's not. Again, historical is an interesting question, because the historical aspect of it really doesn't come into it as such.
I think the kids would think they're ones with no monsters.
Yeah.
And then a more sort of technical look at it is they're purely historical. There's no science fiction elements other than this chap or lady turning up in a blue box who's a time traveller.
Yeah. That's the thing. I'm desperately trying to sort of grope my way towards whether there's to avoid just going yes, no, and just go down and tick box on those kind of criteria. Right.
I'm trying to bend the rules a little bit, because my having looked at the Crusade again, that's made me fall in love with Hartnell stories again almost. And one of my favourite stories with a sort of historical slant is The Time Meddler.
Yes, yeah.
And that's a wonderful historic setting and a key pivotal moment of history, and it's got the wonderful character, the meddling monk, in it as well. It was one of my favourites. So I was just thinking, how blurred are the lines between something that's purely historical, like the Aztecs, and then you've got something like, I don't know, you've got the King's Demons that has a little bit of somebody from the future or someone, a time traveller, interfering with the story again.
So I mean, the Time Meddler is fantastic because you're so sold on the historical setting that it's a real kind of lurch to suddenly realise. I mean, obviously not for probably for the three of us, because we're already spoiled by the fact that it's got the meddling monk in it. But if you take yourself back to the original viewing, for the first however long, it just feels like an ordinary historical, and suddenly you realise that there's anachronisms going on, and then eventually you get the sight of a TARDIS, and you suddenly think, oh my goodness, now the story's turned on its head. So yeah.
Yes. Isn't the gramophone reveal the first?
Yes, I think that's it.
Isn't the skipping gramophone the first hint we get that something's wrong with the monks chanting is actually the gramophone record? It's lovely. It's such a shame that there were some things like that you can't go back and experience completely fresh, as someone would have seen that in as your average fanatical Doctor Who viewer would have experienced it in 1965. So you wouldn't be expecting that, would you? You think, okay, now here's Doctor Who in an exciting adventure with some Vikings and some Normans and some Saxons, rather, and then they're going to throw that one at you.
So if you could both pick one of each, one purely historical with no science fiction in it, other than the Doctor's arrival, and then a story, I call it a sort of time-bending story like the Time Warrior. Which two would you each pick?
Well, I'll tell you a story that I saw. Well, I saw it. I saw the reconstruction of not all that long ago that I really loved, was the Highlanders. I mean, I have to say I knew almost nothing about the Highlanders one way or another. I don't think I'd ever listened to the soundtrack of it. I'd not read the Target novelisation. It came out too late for me. And so I didn't really know what it was about, to be honest. I mean, I'd seen the odd synopsis here or there. So, yeah, I mean, I came on that relatively unspoiled. And there's some fantastic stuff in that story. Polly in particular is fantastic. She leads everyone an absolute merry dance in it.
Poor old Algernon Finch.
Yeah. I mean, the Doctor is
everything that's coming to him, but yeah.
Indeed, the Doctor is crazy. I mean, he's absolutely crazy, but he's almost like a sideshow in it at times. He's not really driving the plot so much. I mean, there are parts when he does, and Jamie's such an incidental character. Really, you sort of feel because of his, because he becomes such an important character that his opening story must be an important figure, but actually, he's neither here nor there. And the reason that they ask him to join, I guess, is more because they like Fraser than because they thought that the character of Jamie was fantastic. But yeah, no, it's I would certainly recommend to anyone, if you can find the loose cannon version of the Highlanders on the internet somewhere. You don't honestly have to look all that hard to find it. Then it's definitely well worth a look.
Thank you.
It's got very dark undercurrent. It's got very dark undercurrent to it as well, isn't it? The Highlanders.
Oh yeah. I mean the whole Highland clearances and so on, and the nastiness of the English soldiers. Yeah, it does.
Yeah. It's interesting. because that comes from the tail end of the original run of historicals, where I think you could say they get more playful in some. I don't know. I guess they're always doing different things, but that's obviously towards the very end. You've got things where they're more riffing on what sort of classic literature's take on certain things. So this is really in the vein of Kidnapped and those Robert Louis Stevenson adventure stories and things like that. And The Smugglers is obviously the Bastard Child of Moonfleet and Treasure Island.
Yeah.
And then, for me, I personally, I can't get past. I think it has to be the Aztecs.
Yeah, very good.
Is just, it's a superlative episode, story in so many ways. And interestingly enough, it does quite raise this question of where do you draw the line, and how do you find a pure historical? Because although it's a pure historical in terms of that there are no other science fiction trappings of all of them, it's the one where the science fiction concept of can you alter history? What does it of all of the historicals that that I can bring to mind. It's the one where that is put front and centre. So in some ways, it's a sci-fi story, and that it's debating that question of what are the ethics and the implications within the Doctor Who universe of trying to do, if Barbara tries to do that. And I don't think there's anything that really touches on it quite so much. Although obviously the Crusade briefly touches on it at the end. Vicky ponders on whether they could sort of help Richard by or change things by sort of telling Richard that he's not going to get to Jerusalem. But yes, and again, that's very much at the the Aztecs is very much at the Shakespearean end of the historical scale, isn't it? Yeah, it's one of those perfect storms of everything coming together and making something really outstanding, just as a piece of television as well as a piece of Doctor Who, I think.
Sure. So, Simon, you got a favourite?
Yes,
very good. The Highlanders is high on my list as well, but I love The Smugglers.
Oh yeah.
Another story. Sadly, there's very little remaining of it, but I've got a big soft spot for Cornwall because I'm a huge Poldark fan. So I love the setting. From what we can see and hear of it, I think the acting is top notch in it as well.
Yeah.
And it's just a lovely historical romp. It's a strong Ben and Polly story, and there's not enough of those really for me.
No,
They're
absolutely.
two of my favourite characters and companions, and they're much overlooked. So that's a really strong one for me. And then all the time bending ones, there's all sorts that springs. There's Pyramids of Mars.
Yes.
The Time Warrior, the Mask of Mandragora, I think, is my favourite.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, for
the time-bending ones.
For that, I was going to say Evil of the Daleks. I quite like the Victorian setting in that, and the juxtaposition of the Daleks against the country house. I think is quite interesting. Do not feed the flying pests, whatever it is.
Yes, I suppose we were doing...
Yes, they tend to crap all over your car, don't they?
Yes. Yeah, Dalek bodywork is a hell to clean.
Yeah.
All those bumps. Yes, I suppose if we were picking the ones with more sci-fi to them, I would, having name checked it already, I think I'd probably say Vincent and the Doctor. I'd go new series, really.
Good choice, yep.
And again, it's one of those marvellous things where it does something different with the format. It's in some ways it almost is a pure historical. And okay, I guess we're meant to take the monster at face value as being a real monster. But yes, and it does that marvellous, sappy, very Richard Curtis moment of where it's one of those things that only a non-Doctor Who writer would come in and say, well, why can't I just take him to the future and show him what his legacy is going to be? Because anyone more versed in the series lore will say, well, no, you can't rewrite history, not one line. Yeah, so that would be my choice.
Although he kind of has his cake and eats it too, doesn't he? Because he still doesn't change the history. But I mean, I think it works in both ways. I think it has the marvellous moment where he realises that he has had an impact, and yet also that that's not going to change the ultimate impact, because in the end, of course, it's not really about his self-esteem, is it? It's an illness that he's got.
Yes, yeah.
Good. Well, Simon, thanks for that. It's food for thought. Sorry, did you have anything else you wanted to say to us?
No, all solid choices. I came up with a great big list. There's Talons of Wing Chiang. That's a historical setting.
If Paul were with us, he probably would have pulled that one out.
But no, that was a lot of fun, and that was all kick-started, of course, by watching the Crusade.
Yeah.
Which we're going to talk about now.
Indeed.
Sir Richard of Smith, I've been waiting to speak with you.
Oh, are you William Shakespeare? Pray, what about?
Thief!
I beg your pardon?
Visitor of sorrows, depriver of my children, robber of my goods.
Who's this? Do you know? His face is a bit familiar.
No, I do not. But never mind that. You steal my words.
Really?
Listen to this sketch. It is formed from the very words of my pen.
And a pretty poor sketch too. Where's the plausibility? Where did you both come from?
Words. One after another. All stolen from me.
Yeah, and stolen from me.
Yes. Now there really is a point there, isn't there? If I stole from you, William Shakespeare, how could I steal from him? Ah, David Whitaker.
Ah.
You did steal from me.
Then how could I steal from him, eh, you blockhead?
Please. Now, I had the words first.
Oh, how nice for you.
And I had them second.
Did you receive them from me?
No.
Then, whoever it was stole them from Shakespeare must have given them to you. Now, don't you agree?
Yes.
So Mr. Whitaker must have stolen them from you.
Whitaker, you villain!
Now, just a minute. Oh, my dear Shakespeare, so undignified. Whitaker may have copied the form of your plays, but he arranged them in good faith and was paid for them in good money, just as you were.
But I've come to catch a thief.
Mr. Shakespeare, your own plays are an amalgamation of stories from history and legend. If anything, you are the thief.
Ah, alack, I have caught my thief, and it is I.
Joy to you, Richard, giver of life to a writer on a BBC salary.
Yes, off you go. Phew, that was a close shave. Who'd have thought reusing scenes from Doctor Who as a comedy sketch would be so perilous? So, Crusade, David Whitaker, 4 parts from 1965. Clearly, obviously, I picked this one because I thought, well, we've got a story that has at least some part set in the Middle East in the Middle Ages. What else have we got that does that? Well, okay, what about the Crusade? And as Giles has said, that's the only superficial thing that the two things share. Really, is and it's still almost 200 years apart. But they do have almost the same setting, and you do, I guess, see that to some extent when in terms of those chase sequences in the dark going through the edge of the city. But yeah, that's very, very thin. I'll come at the end maybe to some other similarities. But the Crusade, I mean, we've kind of touched on it both in terms of the sketch, and also we've mentioned it more than once. This kind of sense of it almost being a Shakespearean play, written very nicely, I think, by David Whitaker. Not talking down to the children of the mid-60s, but actually demanding in a way that even if they don't follow every single word and every single meaning, that they're carried along by the way the actors are playing it, and that they'll sort of understand the meaning of it. So yeah, I think something to be learned maybe in that for modern writers who sometimes feel that things need to be telegraphed and extremely obvious for the younger viewers, and David Whitaker didn't hold by that. He was quite happy to allow them to work it out for themselves. So anyway, thoughts about the Crusade?
Well, we just talked about historicals and the lines being blurred between what's purely historical, and people might be wondering, well, how can these historical stories be any good? There's no monsters in them, there's not much science fiction, what's so good about them? And if you haven't seen a classical Hartnell that you can still get your hands on and see somewhere, then please do it, because the beauty of them is the TARDIS arrives somewhere randomly, and because of the quality of the writing and the acting, the crew and the Doctor are instantly immersed in that particular period. So in the Crusade, Ian seamlessly becomes the Knight of Jaffa.
Yeah.
Barbara becomes immersed in the world of Saladin. So you see the Crusade from both perspectives, from Richard the Lionhearts and his entourage, and then Saladin as well. And you're not worried about the lack of monsters after a while watching it, because you're wondering how Ian's going to find Barbara, so you're gripped by that. You can see a wonderful performance as well by William Hartnell. He does a bit of comedy, stealing some clothes as a disguise. He has wonderful on-screen chemistry with Vicky. And then, as ever with Hartnell, as you'll see, guys, when you dip into the classical stories that still survive, he totally immerses himself in the world and starts to meddle in affairs of court with Richard the Lionheart, and trying to broker plans between Saladin and Richard the Lionheart, and it's just totally gripping. It's like watching a marvellous BBC costume drama. It's that good.
Yes, yeah. I was just checking, and it's interesting because this is the second of the Series 2 historicals, so obviously we've had the Romans, the one that comes before this, and that's the one that really breaks the mould and starts doing different things.
Yeah.
The Series 1 historicals, I guess, are they all treat it fairly straight.
Yeah.
In terms of, they don't muck around with the format particularly. It is an adventure set in that particular time, whereas then we have the Romans, which is pretty much a full-on farce, and then this one which is amped up to Shakespearean levels with a bit of boys' own adventure thrown in as well. And I think it's great. It's interesting what you were saying about, because I guess this is stuff in terms of what they feel the need to explain. I guess for the average 8-year-old viewer of 1965, they were immersed in a lot of the. I don't know, Sir Lancelot was sometime before, but they were immersed in a lot of these kind of ITC adventure serials that were set around this period, and it was clearly, I guess, the Crusades and stuff featured a lot more in the history curriculum, such as it was back in the day. It was more part of our island story. God help us, at that time. Then maybe it's faded from the curriculum, and now is.
It was certainly, when I learnt history, the Crusades were part of that syllabus. You, when I did O-level history, you could have answered a question about the Crusades.
So I guess there's an element of that, but it certainly, as you say, it takes no prisoners. It assumes there's going to be a certain amount of knowledge on the part of its viewers, and anything they don't get, they can catch up on, and the writing is strong enough to impart it without having to whack them over the head, bludgeon it into them, without having to have the Doctor go off on a, as you know, my boy.
Yes. Well, Hartnell doesn't have to say that the Muslims are terribly civilised, because Bernard Kay is demonstrating that they're very civilised with his performance as Saladin.
Yeah. I
mean, possibly, more of a northern accent than you'd expect Saladin to have, but essentially it works fine. I mean, so you've got this whole blacking up problem these days, and I think the thing with Bernard Kay's performance is that he's not in any way parodying an Arab performance. In fact, he barely makes any concession towards that. He essentially plays it, as he would play any part, but he has been given that kind of makeup to kind of signify, oh look, here is here's an Arab character.
Though I think they dialed it down in between the first couple of episodes.
Yeah, possibly.
I believe that's paler in the later one. But yes, I made a note to that. And across the cast, really. I mean, I think that's why nobody. I don't think nobody puts on a silly accent.
There's one character
apart from Titilemko. Yes.
Yes.
Ibrahim.
Yeah.
Who I was. Yes. But we'll come on to him maybe later.
Yeah, indeed.
But so I think that's. And obviously we're sort of talking about this, and we know that Wang Shang habitually gets it in the neck for the yellow face. But then you could certainly argue that Chang and John Bennett, isn't it? And that part is played with dignity, and he is a nuanced character in many ways. But maybe it's the lack of other nuanced Chinese characters around him. Yeah. That is why it's rather more vulnerable to it. Whereas here, it feels like, okay, yes, it's a convention of the time that you didn't have that many, working Arab, actors of the right ethnicity, and that was just what you did. But there aren't any fortunately nobody feels the need to ham it up again with the with the possibly honourable exception of to let him go.
Yeah.
When he turns
it's not culturally disrespectful because of the quality of the acting, isn't it?
No, exactly.
Saladin's a very noble and wise character. Both camps have got a sort of villain. There's the Earl of Leicester, isn't there, in Richard the Lionheart's court, and the chap who stalks Barbara continuously with the scar. I can't remember his name.
El Akir.
Thank you. So I think it's very clever, and take note, modern script writers, they've got those companions and they use them really well to weave the story. So they get split up, and then you've got the story of Ian trying to get Barbara back, but at the same time you get to see within the court of Saladin and how they all interact. And then there's sympathetic Saracen characters who help Barbara and her sister. So I think it's all treated very sympathetically, and it's a cracking story.
Yeah, so it doesn't over-egg it, but it's a tragedy. It's interesting that the characters are trying to, the leaders on both sides are really trying to get out of this situation that they have found themselves in. So it's a remarkably, honestly I don't know quite how these things were taught in the. Would have been taught in the mid-60s, but Richard, you're not as that vintage to quite know. You'd have been you were a good few years after that. So.
Indeed.
But it seems remarkably progressive and enlightened. In some ways, even from today's standards, it's the kind of thing that you could. It's the kind of thing that you could see being written into modern Doctor Who. Or any, I guess, modern drama, that it does handle everything remarkably even-handedly.
Yes, it's almost the exact opposites from what you would expect of a mid-60s story, particularly for children. You'd expect that they'd play up Richard as the hero, but at the same time, mercilessly trying to force the Saracens back, and that the Saracens would be the obvious villains of the piece and have nothing good about them, and he turns that completely on the head. And if anything, Saladin is the best character. Richard is kind of a bit petty at times, but still has a certain ability about him as well. So very interesting choices from David Whitaker.
Yeah, and I can certainly remember when in my youth, reading stuff that was absolutely a lot of stuff was absolutely unalloyed in its praise for Richard the Lionheart. Yeah. As being as being this heroic character, and certainly there's been more that people have been more. The more you look into it, the more people are inclined to take a long hard look.
Indeed.
I guess that's the only possible misstep that he makes from a modern sort of from the point of view of stuff we as what we now know kind of thing. That's the idea that Richard is pining for England. It's a little bit of a misstep because he'd never said
pining for the Loire, perhaps.
Barely set foot here, and just wanted to really rinse us. He was not all that much better than his brother in terms of just seeing England as a bit of a cash cow for financing his foibles. But yes, and it is a remarkable. And Julian Glover, it's a remarkable performance. You can see why that lad went on to do very well for himself, can't you?
Yes.
I think it's not quite his first screen. He'd done a few things, bit parts in films and so on beforehand, but it's good. This is Dougie Camfield, isn't it, as well, directing?
Yes.
Yes.
It's almost the dream team, isn't it? Camfield and Whitaker.
Yeah. Which makes it all the sadder that we're missing 2 episodes. Because I would dearly love to see the opening scenes between Richard and Joanna, which are in episode 2, which we're missing.
Yeah.
I think there's some. I'd love to see how that was played, because it sounds like they are being somewhat flirtatious and perhaps playing into some of the scurrilous rumours that I understand
pertain
to that pertain to those two, historically speaking. Well, I think, so far as I know, it was all just stuff that was put around to badmouth Richard and to badmouth them, but I think it still might have informed how they acted things. And so it would be very interesting. And Jean Marsh is also brilliant, of course.
Yeah. Yes, she does a fantastic turn. They're historically, I won't bang on about this, but historically they're a very bizarre family. I mean, between Richard, John, and the elder brother whose name I've forgotten, they're forever plotting to try and overthrow their father, or it'd be one taking on the other, or whatever. Between about the.
Was it Geoffrey? Was he the one that didn't get?
Yeah, but fundamentally between the sort of 1170s and when Richard died, there's any number of kind of nasty stuff going on between them and the father, and they get Henry II to the point where he's about to abdicate, but then it doesn't happen, and so I mean, you could almost believe anything. But nonetheless, in the context of this story, I think Jean Marsh and Julian Glover do a fantastic turn of brother and sister that are sometimes together and sometimes at odds, and you get that kind of subtlety where by episode 4 Richard's kind of given up on the whole marriage idea. He thought it was a brilliant plan, but it's not going to work, so okay, what's the next? So which I quite like about it.
Yes,
shows flexibility.
And the scene at the end of episode 3 where Joanna finds out what Richard has planned, that is just barnstorming.
Absolutely.
It's got brilliant dialogue from Whitaker, and they're both absolutely on fire. It's marvellously done. So.
Yeah, you can almost see the sparks flying, can't you, between the pair of them? No, that is really good. Like it is. You get a real heavy heart realising that there's 2 episodes missing. That, I mean, like as Richard suggested earlier, try and find loose cannon where you can track them down, but it is with heavy heart.
Yes, I watched it with the loose cannon reconstruction as homework for this, which is the first time I've watched it. It's funny, I've listened to the soundtrack a couple of times in the past. It's always slightly it's a slight jolt to realise, hang on, especially episode 4, I had conjured castles in the air in terms of quite how they staged it and so on. I had imagined there were horses, and there were there was a quite big courtyard set and people climbing in and out of windows and so on. But then you see the screen caps and you think, well, no, okay, it wasn't like that. So far as you can judge from what shots we have to go from, but it shouldn't really detract. And I'm sure Dougie Camfield executed everything with his characteristic panache and working miracles in a small space. It's a shame in episode 2 we're missing the merchant Ferrigo, the one who playing 2 sides off against the middle and just always looking for the angle, and that's rather a nice, also quite a nuanced take on the war. So it's very pleasingly cynical in that regard.
It's so. I mean, I find it a fascinating story. It's a story that's called The Crusade that isn't really about the Crusade. It's a story that has a fantastic byplay between Richard and Saladin, and they never meet. It's got Jean Marsh and Julian Glover, as we said, have a fantastic parts, but they're not really at the heart of the story. The Doctor is kind of a bit part player in it. I mean, he's comic relief for a couple of episodes. In the cod Shakespeare that this is, and actually rather good Shakespeare at times. He plays the part of the comic relief, and Vicky, of course, is another Shakespearean trope is the cross dresser. Starts out being the boy and then dresses as the girl. Yeah, and really what the story is about, I suppose, if anything, is about Barbara and her struggles and sort of seeing the darker side of El Akir and whatever and the harem, but reuniting that family that's that's been torn apart at one part, and then bringing, reuniting the remaining members of it, and then the escape. I mean, if anything, it's about, Barbara gets abducted 30 seconds into the story, and then 30 seconds from the end of the story they run into the TARDIS and get away, and in between all of that it's really all only been about trying to preserve their lives in a very dangerous scenario.
Yes, I suppose in terms of the driving plot of it, as you say, that's a good summary of it.
Yeah, it's just talk about Douglas Camfield and the whole production values. I was moaning last week about the story being supposed to be in Madagascar and Peru, and with something as good as the Crusade, you just don't care that it's studio bound. It's so well done. The forest scenes and the market, and then all of the different places that Barbara hid and where she's recaptured and so on. It's so well done. You just don't mind. You're totally drawn into the story because of the quality of the acting, and it really is superb. It's a great bit of television. You almost forget you're watching a science fiction show and you're watching an excellent costume drama. It's that good.
Yeah, I mean, you get Jackie Hill as well in this. I mean, is Barbara going to use the knife? I mean, I think to some extent, the extant episode 3 is the high point of it. It may well be that if we had episode 2, that might eclipse it, but certainly episode 3 that we do have. I mean, there's some fantastic taut drama in that with Haroon and his family, and with Barbara, and she's got choices to make, and you've got, as you said earlier, you've got Richard and Joanna's confrontation right at the end. You've got a nice bit of Saladin and Safadin as well. So everything, and comic business from Hartnell and O'Brien's. You've got everything in that one episode, and it's beautifully put together, I think.
Yes, episode 4 slightly, so far as one can judge. I know, it reaches the climax in terms of the action resolving the plot, but it maybe goes very slightly off the. Maybe we've just gone slightly off the boil in that the whole the Ian in the desert plot does. It is a bit of a departure into comic book villainy.
Yeah,
and this is the one place where we get our little our silly accent brigade. Although then again, it's Tusilemko, and I don't know. I don't think I've ever seen Fiddler on the Roof, but he was and I was just reading about him earlier, and he was Norwegian. So, but possibly because there's a whole group of Norwegian Assyrians. I believe there. I can't look into the right details, but I think he'd have been of the right ethnicity, and of course he pops up in all sorts of places. Raiders of the Lost Ark, Fiddler on the Roof, and so on. But even he is he's not unlike the Emir Al-Akir. He's not an out and out villain, because for all he does to all the torture he inflicts on Ian in the first half, he then becomes the comic relief Ian's new Bezzy mate. Just in time for the rescue. So quite happy to heap phrases on Ian and help him out, which is quite, which is a nice little turnaround, I think. So I think that counts for a lot.
So I've got a bit to talk about parallels between the two stories. Are there any other things that you two want to talk about the Crusade before we finish talking about that broadly?
One thing I was maybe going to say about I found it odd in episode 1 that Barbara opens up to Saladin about their travels, as it were.
Curious.
It's a curious little choice, although I guess it does. It's interesting that it sets up, but then this doesn't go quite as postmodern as you expect, because I like the idea that it's setting up. Barbara has the idea that she can try to be Scheherazade.
Yeah, indeed.
It sort of sets up the idea that that Barbara's Saladin assumes from all the stuff Barbara was saying that she's that she's with a troupe of travelling players, and then Barbara gets the idea of there is a reference to Scheherazade, who obviously Saladin knows that story already, and then the idea that Barbara has Barbara's going to retell bits of Shakespeare and things like that she knows, is quite pleasingly, I guess these days you call it postmodern. It's almost a shame she doesn't start retelling the stories of their of her own travels on the TARDIS. But unfortunately, we don't actually get to the point where that is ever. She's never called to actually have to play that role, because she falls into the hands of into the middle of the Kia's machinations before that ever really comes off.
Yeah. Simon, any thoughts about that before we move on to the parallels?
No closing thoughts from me, thanks, Richard.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, you'll probably find some of these kind of facile, but I've already talked about hide and seek in Middle Eastern towns in the Middle Ages. We get that. So I think there's the psychological threat of El Akir and the psychological threat that the Eternals pose is kind of worse than the physical side of things. And indeed, El Akir, he's all consumed with Barbara having tricked him into thinking that he's got Richard and Joanna when he's just got 2-bit part players, and it's all about his honour thereafter. But he says at one point, all you have to look forward to is death, and death is a long way away. And I mean, he plays that with a really nice piece of menace, I think, and you get the sense that and everybody fears El Akir in the town. You get from Haroun, you get all that as well. So in a sense, he's more of a threat almost off screen, or at least without actually doing anything. You get that sense of menace, and in the same way, I suppose the eternal characters in Can You Hear Me? It's all about the nightmares and about what they can subject the people to. That's the biggest threat.
Yes. Something else has just occurred to me, of course,
yeah.
which slightly connects to El Akir and at least his reign of terror in the town. It's a nice directorial. I don't know. I'd be interested to know if it was scripted or whether it was Douglas Camfield being innovative. But I did like in keeping with this. If there is a kind of war is hell theme to this, I did think it added another dimension. The fact that you only had the one thing in the one scene or set in Haroun's house, but you hear noises of the search going on, and people being terrorised outside as the entire town is turned upside down by as they're looking for Barbara. Yeah, it adds another dimension that wouldn't necessarily be there, possibly in the hands of a lesser writer or director who would have just played it straight.
Completely sells it as well for me. I mean, I don't need to see that happening. You see them come into the sort of rear of the house and knock stuff over, and generally being not unlike that the scene in Enemy of the World episode 3 where they try desperately to smash the pots, but yes, I mean they're being kind of goon-like, and you can sort of extrapolate from that what's going on in the rest of the town, and the sound sells it really well. We've also got siblings in each story, so we get Yaz and Sonia in Can You Hear Me? You get Richard and Joanna in Crusade, and the relationship between them, both sets, is somewhat complex. One minute they're sort of together, and one minute they're at each other's throats. So I mean, I'm not saying that necessarily takes us anywhere, but it's kind of interesting that there's a theme there, and it doesn't necessarily drive the whole plot, but it's an important subplot in both stories. And I think also, so this is the last one that I've got, and no stronger than any of the others, but in both stories, I think what appears to be the main plot isn't necessarily the main plot. So I've already said I don't think that the Crusade is necessarily about the Crusade, and similarly, I don't think that Can You Hear Me is about the eternal characters. It's about much more than that, and it's about what's happening to the humans, I think.
There's another overlap. We see a side in last week's episode. We see a side of Aleppo we don't hear much about nowadays, which is the healthcare side and the caring side of the people there, and having an early attempt at a sort of mental health hospital.
Yeah.
And then in the Crusade, we see a kinder side to the Saracens rather than the boys' own version that people were probably more used to in the 50s and 60s and previously as well, where we see Saladin being a true monarch and a wise man, and also the kind people who help Barbara as well.
Yeah.
So we see both sides there, and we see a kinder side to something that perhaps changes our perception.
I guess actually, just thinking about it, there's with regard to Saladin has always been particularly prone to being sort of I don't know whether you call it noble savage treatment or whatever, but to being dignified as being the like the good Muslim, as it were, in Western literature, at least since Walter Scott wrote a book that's sort of set around the same time as Ivanhoe, called The Talisman, which is based on I read it years ago, but I think that has the conception of to do with Saladin sending medicine for Richard when Richard was ill in the field during the Crusades, and the idea of there being this mutual respect. But I think where the Crusade probably lifts it is that most of the other characters are multifaceted on both sides, and we have these others that are we have bad Europeans and a lot of good people on the good Saracens. So it's not just confined to Saladin himself.
Yeah. I mean, of course, tonally, dramatically different stories. It would have been fascinating, not really very realistic, but if Canfield had survived and still been directing in his 90s, it would be interesting to see what he would have made of the new series. Because clearly was one of the standout directors of the original series. Perhaps, I mean, we saw Graham Harper doing rather a tour de force in some of the episodes early on in the new series.
Yes, he certainly made the transition well.
So have we wrung every last drop out of that pairing, do you think, or anything else anyone wants to say?
No, I'm a bit guilty. I'm a huge Troughton fan, and I'm a bit guilty of neglecting the Hartnell years, but watching the Crusade again and catching up with the reconstructions, that's really whetted my appetite for some more, I think. So I'll be dipping back into more Hartnell, I think, when the chance arises.
Yes, Giles, you said you were a born-again Hartnell fan when we talked about where we came from many moons ago. Certainly, as far as I'm concerned, when we haven't really talked about it, it is a fantastic performance from William Hartnell. It does whet the appetite for seeing some more. And it's the first time on this podcast that we've chosen a Hartnell episode, so I think we'll have to dig out some others as we go along, because that was a really good watch.
Yes, I do have to say I think Hartnell generally, though, rewards pacing yourself and remember. Well, I think watching an episode at a time, when circumstances allow, and having intervals to digest and coming back, I just think that the way the show was paced in those early days, it works better, and I found that was the key to that, plus the massively enhanced picture quality of the restored DVDs. Were really the two things that suddenly made me think, wow, this is really good stuff.
Okay, well, next week or reality in a few days' time, we've got Frankenstein or something. We've certainly got Mary Shelley.
Yeah, they gave very little away, didn't they, at the end of the last episode about what was coming next, other than the title and a few quick glimpses. So it'd be fun if it's a classic historical story, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Okay. Well, look. Thanks once again for spending an hour and a half or so talking about those two very different stories. And Simon, thanks for your musing over historicals. That was a fun and interesting segment. So yeah, thanks to both of you for sharing some time with us.
Yeah, thank you. Always a pleasure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you both.
And you can expect another short one from us next week, looking at that upcoming episode. So bye bye for now.
Yep. Bye bye everybody.
Bye.
Yeah, I think that works.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I mean, or at least it works as well as it's ever going to.
So, Simon, if your theory is correct, then does that mean that Miss Cathcart's the master?
And she'd have gotten away with it too if it hadn't been for those pesky kids.